But I think this right here, I'm envisioning, you've got sapwood here. This piece could be cut any number of ways. I guess it's fairly mass heavy here. It's not as heavy as some of the other woods, but I don't know that I would quarter it. Can you go to the overhead camera, Murray? Thanks. There we go. I'm not sure if, because of the size here, it probably would need to be bigger if we were to quarter that. But definitely looking at, does that show? Yeah, it does. So. There we go. I like having the lighter sapwood on either side there. So I was thinking maybe cutting this one like that, or like that. And speaking of cutting, what seems to work best is, you want to always try to keep the chip out and the tear out to a minimum when you're cutting with anything. And y'all probably know some better methods than I do. I know you do. But using painter's tape seems to help. And so when I mark the halfway division line, I'll be sure I mark it, go all the way around, especially on the bottom where it's going to be cutting with the bandsaw, to try to minimize the tear out. And then the same on where I'm going to be cutting across there too. The bandsaw definitely seems to make the biggest difference with the cutting. And what else was I going to tell you about the cutting? Bandsaw. All right. Any other questions about the cutting of it? Very carefully. Yeah. How do you hold it? Because when you have something that is at this stage, it's, this just right here just has some clear, I'll talk about finishing in a second. This is sanded to like 400, 600, and has a clear natural stain on it. But once you remove the tenon, typically you're going to have two good flat sides to hold it while you're cutting it. In fact, Murray, can you go to the slides? I do have some slides on cutting. This would be a good time to interject that. Go ahead. Just keep going. I already covered that. That was on the wormy ash. Keep going. Okay, stop right there. Here's when I was doing some cutting on some of them using bandsaw. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And there you can see some of there were some challenges, and so I was over at George Freeman's shop using his nice bandsaw, and we ended up sort of using a fence and creating some sacrificial boards. It was just sort of on the fly. You had to try to come up with something so you could keep it accurate and safe and stable. There may end up being some kind of special jig that works best for this. I'm not sure what it is, but the end result is you just want to end up having some nice looking bookends. It's not gonna, I don't get all bent out of shape if it's off a degree here or there. That doesn't bother me. Go to the next slide. All right, and you don't have to stay there now. But Murray, you can switch back. On finishing considerations, something that I have considered and thought about a lot, as far as the top coat, what seems to, in my opinion, what works really well, since it's going to be a functional piece in the home, is I use wipe-on polyurethane and do a bunch of layers of that and build up a hard protective coat. One of the things with the finishing considerations too is, and this, I've got different opinions on this, and but I think it's Hobby Lobby. There's these little self-adhesive little bumpers, rubber bumpers. Sometimes when you have something finished, it can be a little slippery. It can be a little slick, and this walnut half of the bookends, really, it was one I did some time ago, early on. I just kept it. It doesn't have a lot of mass. It really needs more mass, but having those bumpers on there helps it stay put better and hold the books. So that's something that I think is a good consideration when you're doing the finishing. I had the hardest time trying to figure out the best way to finish these, because when you have something on your lathe, it's a lot. You have the inside, you have an outside of a bowl, but when you have a piece like this, how do you go about finishing that? I tried little painter's triangles, the things you put on them. I thought that was good until it started making little marks, so I said, no, that's not good. So basically where I am now is the best way I've learned to finish them that gives the best results is just as if, when you're doing a bowl finish, you're doing the inside, then you're doing the outside. And so I'll just do the sides here and as much as I can down here, and then let that dry and cure, and then turn it over, and then do the same. And just be very careful where I'm interacting the two blends of the finish there. There's probably some better ways to do that. There may be some way where you could maybe hang it. I guess if you're spraying, you could do something like that. I'm not sure. But the finishing part is still sort of a challenge. I will tell you something that I have really been searching for. I've been very dissatisfied with little dust fuzzies and in the finish. I mean, it just drives me crazy. I feel like I use a tack cloth and then use like a clean piece of rag or towel or whatever. But I recently found this that I've started using. So far, it looks like it may be what I've been looking for. It's microspun towels. It's a 5-pack. It's for lint-free microfilament fabric. Super strong and absorbent. Anyway, I've been doing some finishing with this recently and just cut a little piece of it, and it's not leaving any kind of dust, and so I'm real pleased with that. Hopefully it will continue. This will last me a long time, because all I need is when I'm doing a finishing layer, that's all I'm using. You can pass that around if you want. But it's I work part-time at Rockler, and I saw this there, and I said, hey, I'll give that a try. So this is available at Rockler. I'm not trying to give a plug for Rockler, but hey, there you go. I don't remember the price. What else on the finishing? And then there's some suggested resources. On the handout, there are some. I gave you the website for the wooddatabase.com, and also there's some websites. Something that really helps me is just looking at different shapes, different forms, whether it's a bowl or some type of artistic piece, just to give me some kind of extra inspiration when I'm looking at the curve of something. And there are some good resources that I put in the handout there for that. Like I say, if you leave tonight and go, well, if he did that, then I bet you I could make some bookends too. It's really not all that difficult. It's just taking some skills that we already have in working with curves and creating basically sort of like a cheese round, and then deciding how you want to cut it, then figuring out how do you want to cut it, and the bandsaw seems the best way to do that, and then dealing with the challenges of finishing, because you have this object that's a little hard to finish, or at least it is for me, compared to a bowl. I have a little bit, but I didn't like the quality of the finish. Maybe I didn't know what I was doing. The question was, have I ever used aerosol can finishes? And yeah, I have some, but I was more pleased with of everything I've done using the thinned wipe-on poly. That's why I think I've had the best results. Me personally, it's just my own opinion. What other good questions? That light is bright.
So,
Yes, sir.
I know you're picking heavy woods here, but have you ever thought about doing an iron insert or something like that to do a lighter wood that maybe has some spectacular grain?
Sure. Yeah, I haven't done it before, but there's no reason, when you think about bookends, many bookends are metal, and you could very well take an L-shaped piece of iron and combine it with wood. I don't have a lot of metal skills, but that would probably be very beautiful. That's a good. The sky's the limit on this, really. It's just only limited to our creativity and what we think we might do with it. We could combine some metal with it. Good question. What else? Glue ups? I have not. I don't see why that wouldn't also be a wonderful thing. Yeah, absolutely. I do really enjoy embellishing different pieces. Go to the PowerPoint one more time, if you would, Murray. Thank you. You could combine other types of woods doing glue ups. Here's those are the one on the left. Well, let me see. Is that your? Yeah, the one on the left is mesquite. The one on the right is Bradford pear with just some incredible figure. Next slide. And this is one thing that I've sort of stumbled upon too, is depending on how you cut them, they can be positioned different ways. They can stand on one side or they can stand on the other side. Here, all those lines I did with guitar strings and just did wire burning, just to give it a different look. That's pecan. Next slide. I have an online store, and one customer wanted the grandchild to be have his initials on the bookends, and so that's where the TC came from. And that was just wood burned, and then the other one was just playing around with some shapes and lines and figures. Sort of gives a steampunk kind of look, I think. I don't know. Next slide. Those wormy ash ones, that was a big piece of wormy ash. I cut it in quarters. Next slide. That was Scales of Justice. That's a piece of mesquite. The next slide. More mesquite. And interestingly, something I did try, the middle one there, that actually is done in grain up. So I had a big piece of mesquite, but it wasn't thick enough to do a normal cut. So I said, well, maybe I could just turn it in grain, see how that would work. And there was a lot of punkiness on the bottom half of that. And so it just sort of worked out that I was able to basically cut them into quarters. The bottom 2 quarters were not usable, really, but the top half of those turned out really, really nice. So you're looking at the end grain there, which I've thought a lot about different ways to do the approach in the way that you put it on the lathe. And again, I think any variation, I don't know that there's any variation that's wrong. It's just going to give you different grain orientation, and you can have some neat opportunities with that. Next slide. Anyway, so I don't need it anymore. What other questions?
How many coats that wipe on poly?
Usually probably about 4 or 5. Good question. The question was how many coats of wipe on poly. I usually do about 4 or 5. Yes, and sand in between. I usually start with about 320 after the first coat, and then go to 400, then 600, then 800, and then 1,000. That's what I usually do. Other questions? All right. Well, we may not have superpowers as wood turners, but we can make some bookends. They're not that hard. And maybe you haven't ever made any before, but they're not that hard. And with all the talent in this room, you have turned so many other things. Try turning some bookends. I think you'll be surprised. And you can give them to somebody, and they really serve a purpose. They don't just sit on a shelf looking pretty. So thank y'all very much.